Can we have starkly different views about hard-hitting issues but stay respectful? Well, I believe we can, and so do my guests. So this week, I'm starting off in the full screen on me because I want to introduce this topic and then bring in two guests. So I haven't done these kinds of shows too many times where I have more than one guest, but I think that in this case, there was a need to ensure that we were getting both sides of the issue. And what we're going to be talking about today is the controversy regarding the recent dismissal of the judge advocate generals from the Air Force, Army, and Navy. And my guests today have two very different views about this issue. I will bring them both in and ask them how they're doing. So Don, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Teresa. I really appreciate you doing this. I think it's a great opportunity, and especially this idea that it's going to be a civilized discussion that we don't often see when it comes to political discussions. So I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. I've been trying to have these kinds of discussions on our female naval officers page, and sometimes they get respectful and they go well, but sometimes they don't. And I wanted to model what I thought would be a respectful debate, and I couldn't think of two better people to do it. So Tim, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Looking forward to discussing it. You know, it is an issue that a lot of people are talking about. And so I think, you know, really hearing both sides and being able to decide for yourself based on those two things, I mean, it is the best way to get to the truth. It's the bedrock of why we have trials. You know, you have two good lawyers on both sides arguing that way, hopefully you get to the truth. So
absolutely. And I really think that that's the right way to be. I mean, I know, Tim, you're a CNN commentator, and you sometimes, or used to be, sorry. And sometimes on those shows, you do have people who disagree with you. And Pierce Morgan is another example. He brings people on his show all the time, and they go back and forth. And it's really interesting to watch. And that's, to be honest, that's who I watched to sort of model myself about. And I knew that this could be possible one day. I just hadn't had the chance yet to get this started. So thank you so much. But welcome everyone to the Stories of Service podcast, Ordinary People Who Do Extraordinary Work. I'm the host of Stories of Service, Teresa Carpenter. This is episode 182. And to get us started in a good place, I'm going to kick it off with an intro from my father, Charlie Picker.
From the moment we're born and lock eyes with our parents, we are inspiring others. By showing up as a vessel of service, we not only help others, we help ourselves. Welcome to S.O.S, Stories of Service, hosted by Teresa Carpenter, here from ordinary people from all walks of life who have transformed their communities by performing extraordinary work.
And Don, I'm going to read a little bit about you. You served as the president of Protect Our Defenders for 8.5 years. In your role as president, you appeared regularly in broadcast and print media to advocate for the rights of crime victims, including appearances on CNN, CBS, NBC, ABC, MSNBC, Fox, and BBC, in addition to the New York Times, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, USA Today, Time, and Newsweek. During that time with Protect Our Defenders, you testified numerous times before Congress on the need to reform the military justice system. And in this time period, your advocacy was critical to the passage of one of the most significant military justice reform in at least 70 years in 2021. You also served as pro bono attorney for victims of military sexual assault and EEO complaints, lawsuits under the Federal Tort Claims Act, and as a special victims counsel. You served as Chief Prosecutor for the United States Air Force between 2010 and 2014, and as trial counsel, defense counsel of military judge for every year in your 23 year in the United States Air Force. And Tim, you are the founder and managing partner of the Parlatore Law Group, nationally recognized attorney who's practiced both criminal defense and civil litigation. An imposing advocate both in and out of the courtroom, you have successfully handled a myriad of complex and consequential cases across many jurisdictions while providing time and time again the best under pressure and he performs best under pressure and in high-profile cases. Throughout your career, you have avoided pigeonholing yourself into representing only certain types of clients or certain types of cases in favor of maintaining an interesting and eclectic portfolio of cases. You initially rose to prominence through representations as the former police commissioner of New York City and the men who parachuted from the World Trade Center and organized crime figures. Though already well known, you skyrocketed worldwide recognition. This is where a lot of my military audience knows you through, which was through the successful defense of Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher and one of the most significant war crimes trial in the history of the U.S. Navy. Obviously, for both of you, there's much more to read in these bios, but welcome to you both.
Thank you.
So first off, I'm just going to start with the latest news, and we're just going to go from there, because I think that's why I wanted to have you both on. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Don, since you're the one who reached out to me for this. And I really want to know from your perspective, as we all saw, I believe it was last Friday evening, the judge advocates generals of the Air Force, the Navy, and the Army were let go. And in fact, I think the Navy had already been let go, and the acting is still there, but they're currently seeking, the Department of Defense is currently seeking nominations. And Don, can you tell me a little bit about why you wanted to come on the show and give your take on it?
Yeah, and I appreciate you letting me do that. So I think this was a really dangerous thing to do. Secretary Hegseth has his reasons, I suppose, why he picked these three individuals, depending on how he viewed the Navy, these three individuals to relieve. The reason I say it's dangerous is because none of these three, as far as we know, have done anything wrong. There's no allegations of criminal misconduct. There's no allegations of malfeasance. I watched Tim's video where he defended this, and he, had said, what evidence do we have that they were doing their job? And I think that flips the presumption that we should be looking at this. We presume that our officers and enlisted force are doing their job. Absent some sort of evidence, they're not. And I will tell you, as many JAGs have reached out to me, Air Force JAGs in particular, talking about how this is a chilling effect on them, that they're concerned. There's also concern about, okay, you've removed these three individuals, and who are you going to pick to put there? What are their qualifications going to be? And why are you disturbing the normal course of transitioning from TJAG to TJAG? And then my final thought on this, I've heard a lot of people say, well, this isn't unprecedented. Harry Truman fired MacArthur, or Obama fired McChrystal. Those people had done something. I mean, MacArthur almost got us into a nuclear war with China and was giving the middle finger to Harry Truman. He wasn't just fired because a new person was in position. These people had done nothing, and there's never been anything like this. And it really demonstrates, in my mind, an animus from Secretary Hegseth to the Jag Corps. He's written and spoken many times about his dislike of JAGs. He has a very derisive term he uses about JAGs. He has said that no infantryman likes an Army JAG. And so it's really concerning, because the JAGs are a very important part of the military. And it's just something that I don't see why these three individuals, out of all the generals and admirals we have, these three, each one of them being the head of the legal branch of the military, are let go at the same time. Okay.
Tim, over to you for your response to that, and how you see this turn of events.
Sure. And before I begin that, I do want to just highlight one quick point. Obviously, Secretary Hegseth is a client of mine, is a longtime client. I represented him through the confirmation hearings. I am here tonight in my personal capacity. I'm not speaking on his behalf. I'm going to give you my opinion.
That's a good point. Thank you.
And, to Don's point, with the exception of, in the Navy is kind of a weird thing. But, because the person who was in the seat, resigned last month. And so, and there is issues of wrongdoing, but setting that aside, general officers and flag officers, they don't just get relieved for having committed misconduct. One of the major reasons why they get relieved is a loss of confidence and trust. And if the commander, or in this case, the secretary, has lost confidence and trust in their ability to lead their organizations, that is a valid reason why somebody would be relieved of command. That happens across the board. They don't have to have done something for that. And yet in this case, I look at it and I say the Jag Corps in general have run aground. There's a lot of things that, they serve a very important function. And yet they have repeatedly failed to perform that function, at the level that we expect. And so the idea of removing all three service judge advocates general, to me, is really a signal that it is time for a reset. Okay. We don't like the way that things have been going over the past several years. And again, I'm more familiar with the Navy than I am with the Army and the Air Force, but obviously there were questions about the legality of the vaccine mandates. But if you just look in the Navy and you look at how things have been conducted and how these court martials have gone and how they have held other people accountable, but never held any of the JAGs accountable for serious misconduct. Whether it's, Fat Leonard, whether it's the Bonhomme Richard, whether it's the Eddie Gallagher case, you have so many instances of total failures of the military justice system, and not a single person ever gets held accountable for any of that stuff. And so the idea of coming in and saying, okay, the leaders of these organizations have run those things aground, to use a ship term. Let's remove those commanders. Let's put in people that are going to change the direction, reintroduce professionalism, ethics, and effectiveness so that the Jag Corps is what our warfighters need as opposed to what it has become.
That's fair. I mean, I can see that. I also can see the side, and Don, you might be able to talk to this about the fact that the JAGs don't make the rules of evidence or the UCMJ laws and those kinds of things. But at the same time, Tim, we have seen so many instances where we did see things happen with the JAGs and they weren't held accountable. What do you have to say to that, Don?
Well, first going to talk about Fat Leonard, which I think is a good topic. A lot of line officers committed a lot of crimes. If you read, Craig Whitlock's book on that, or just read anything on Fat Leonard, what comes out is the one person who stood up and did the right thing was a JAG. He was 04, I believe. He's the one who continually told these officers, you're committing crimes. These are ethics violations. He did what he could to stop that. It was other commanders who made the decision not to hold those accountable. And also you have the huge statute of limitations problem with a lot of these crimes for prosecuting admirals and other people in the Navy. That's why a lot of these cases went to the DOJ. DOJ prosecuted almost all of these cases. So I don't think Fat Leonard is the argument that you have that somehow the Navy JAG did something wrong. I am unaware of this malaise that Tim is talking about in the Jag Corps. I watched your video. I saw what you said about the Navy TJAGs or JAGs in the Navy. You talked about Admiral Crawford and the Berry case. Okay, so what? And for those who don't know, Admiral Crawford was the deputy judge advocate, and he was giving advice to another admiral named Lorge, who wanted to overturn a conviction, which he still had the authority to do. He was one of the last people because of a change in the law on a case that I prosecuted, resulted in commanders losing the ability to overturn convictions. And Lorge wanted to do it, but he apparently didn't have the guts to do it. And so he continually reached out to Admiral Crawford, who he knew, both in person and a phone call. He reached out to Crawford. Crawford didn't reach out to him and asked for his advice. And that went up to the Court of Appeals and Armed Forces, and they said it was improper for Crawford to give that advice because only a staff judge advocate could give that advice. What's important is that Lorge did not feel any way pressured to follow Crawford's advice. He made that clear both in testimony after the trial and in affidavits. He did not in any way feel challenged by Crawford or things like that. And the Court of the Appeals and Armed Forces specifically held, we do not question Rear Admiral Crawford's motives or believe he acted intentionally in this case. This was a case of accidental UCI. So I don't think it really is Admiral Crawford trying to keep an innocent man who, by the way, was found guilty by a military judge. And by the way, had that conviction upheld by the Navy Court of Criminal Appeals. So I don't know if there really is. Yes, from time to time, Air Force in 2004, our Judge Advocate General got in a lot of trouble, and he should have been court-martialed. But you know who made the decision not to court-martial him? A 4-star commander. It wasn't the Jag Corps. So to the degree that there is any kind of malaise, any kind of problems, a lot of that falls on command. And as most people know, we have a mantra in the military, in Jag Corps, JAGs advise and commanders decide. And commanders have decided not to prosecute these people.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. It makes me wonder too, because that is also part of what as I was doing some research for this call, even if a JAG were to advise, Tim, I'll ask you this, the SecDef to not make a certain decision, the SecDef can do whatever he wants, right? He doesn't have to do what the JAG says to do. So are the JAGs truly responsible for the problems that we have in the military justice system, or is this issue much bigger than them and they're just trying to do their best under less than ideal circumstances?
I think that gives them a lot more benefit of the doubt than maybe that they've deserved, because, first of all, when they're advising commanders, the proper way to do it is to say to the commander, here's your left and right limits. But ultimately, where within that range is up to the commander to decide. And, some JAGs are very good at that and saying, if you go outside of these two limits, then you're outside the bounds of the law. And so if the commander does something outside of that, then yes, the commander is breaking the law, and that's not something that they can do. There's a lot of staff judge advocates out there, and I've seen this a lot of times. I represent several flag officers that have dealt with this, where the staff judge advocates come in and try to substitute their own judgment for that of the commander, and then use the power of their law license to trump the stars that are on the collar of the commander, and to say, you need to do this. Instead of saying, here's your range, you need to do this. And oftentimes that's not correct. And so, sometimes these JAGs are definitely overstepping. But then to look at how the military justice system is administered, to simply sit there and point at the commanders and say, oh, well, we were just, following them. No, absolutely not. Every single one of those, he brings up a good point. There was that one 04 JAG who did the right thing in the Fat Leonard case. But what about all of the other SJAs that knew what was going on and who said, go ahead? All of the other staff judge advocates that told their admirals, yeah, go out, go to the party. And yes, some of them have bad paper in their records. Some of them don't. But you have these people that are not held accountable for anything, and they want to point over at the line officers and say, oh, no, just hold them accountable. Don't hold us accountable. I mean, I remember when, after the Gallagher case, and there were a lot of problems with the Regional Legal Service Office, the prosecutor's office in San Diego. The commanding officer there, she should have been relieved. And what the Jag Corps decided to do was they gave her an accelerated change of command. And I remember the reporters asking, them like, well, okay, accelerated change of command. Does that mean she got fired? Oh, no, she didn't get fired. Did she get an end of tour award? Well, no, there was no end of tour award. Was there a ceremony? Was the band there? No, there was no ceremony, no band there. Okay, so she wasn't fired. She got an accelerated end of tour with no accelerated change of command, no end of tour award, no ceremony. Sounds like she got fired. The problem is that the way that the Jag Corps operates, they protect themselves. They protect members of the community. And in doing so, they escape accountability. I mean, the only Navy JAG that you've heard of that's been relieved was somebody who commanded the Justice School a couple of years ago for not something that was that serious. And yet when you have people that are going out there and committing intentional misconduct, illegal warrantless spying operation.
I was about to say that a Gallagher case. Yeah.
Right. Illegal warrantless spying operation to surveil defense counsel. And they won't even do a professional responsibility review. Okay, now I'll give the Air Force a lot of credit. The Air Force, they have a very robust program that when there is ever, an allegation of prosecutorial misconduct, that will automatically trigger a professional responsibility review at the end of the case. The Navy doesn't do that. The Navy hardly ever has a professional responsibility review of any of their JAGs. In the rare instance where it has happened, I talked to a friend of mine who represented one person in one of these cases, years ago, and they actually got to a hearing. They didn't even have a procedure. They didn't have a script or a procedure of how to do a professional responsibility hearing because they don't do them ever because they don't hold their people accountable. Now, the Air Force is much better on that. And there's a lot of things here where every service does things a bit differently. And so it would be worthwhile to bring all of them together and to have the Navy look at the Air Force, have the Air Force look at the Navy and say, okay, what do you do differently than we do? Why are we so different? And, it is the uniform code of military justice, not, the Navy's code and the Air Force's code. And because Don's the Air Force guy, I'm going to keep picking on these two services and the Army's going to kind of slide. It is when you have the people that are in charge of accountability that don't provide any accountability for their own community, that's a problem.
But holding your own self accountable is really hard. I'm kind of going back and forth myself to both of you because you absolutely can't. I mean, what does that even look like? But I'll turn it over. Don, do you have anything to
SWOs
add?
do it all the time. SWOs will fire other SWOs. A SWO admiral will fire a SWO CO anytime.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. So let me say, if I can do a couple of quick things. First, I'm not an expert on the Navy's Jag Corps comings and goings and any kind of issues they have. And if there was a reason to fire the Navy JAG, fine. As you've said, the Air Force doesn't seem to have those problems. It's not perfect. No institution's perfect. So why fire General Plummer? And I want to make it clear, I'm not General Plummer's fan and he hates my guts. So I'm not here to say I love General Plummer. Oh, well, to him, why did he get fired? I'm just saying, why was he fired? It's the trifecta of the firing that sends the message that I'm particularly concerned about. I will say in 2004, when the decision was made by a commander, a 4-star commander, not to prosecute General Fiscus, I was outraged. I sent an email to the acting judge advocate general that probably did not help my career to express my disgust that Fiscus wasn't held accountable. It is a problem. And I would say if you had a situation where you could point to General Plummer, again, not a friend, and say, General Plummer, you failed in this case. General Plummer, your leadership is lacking. Yeah, I agree. Lack of confidence is a reason to fire somebody, but you should have a basis for it. For the Army Judge Advocate General, don't know the man, but he failed in some way. There's something. It doesn't have to be a crime. Oftentimes it is a crime. But is there something that shows that either one of these individuals, faced with issues that you're talking about, Tim, failed to act? And without that, it sends a message that these were political firings. And Secretary Hegseth, on Sunday, went on a talk show and he said, we want lawyers who give sound constitutional advice and don't exist to attempt to be roadblocks to anything that happens. All right. Is there something that shows that any one of these three don't give sound legal advice? Is there something that shows that they'd be a roadblock? I've served since 1991, retired in 2014, but gone through multiple changes in administration. And I've never once, going from Republican to Democrat, ever heard a judge advocate general, any JAG, say, I'm not going to follow the orders of this guy. I didn't vote for him. I'm anti-Trump. I'm a never Trumper. It didn't happen in 2017. There's no reason that in 2021 to believe that any one of these three people were going to be a roadblock to any lawful actions taken by either Secretary Hegseth or the president.
Yeah, that does bring up a good point, is that it's hard to look at their individual records of the three people that were let go without knowing. And that brings up another point, even with the COs who get relieved. Do you think the public has a right to know when somebody gets fired or let go? Do you think, and I'll turn this over to you, Tim, to answer first. Do you think the public has the right to know the circumstances surrounding the reason for the people being let go?
That's a difficult question. Sometimes, sure, but there are other times when the answer is no. And there is a tradition where when senior people are let go. So, for example, the chairman or the chief of naval operations, that when those people are replaced, the secretary will simply say, we thank them for their service, wish them well, and they say all nice things. And whatever internal disputes there were don't become public. Now, as happened in the first Trump administration, some of those people then immediately went out on CNN to talk about what a terrible person the president was, and then that kind of opened the floodgates to, okay, well, now I fired that person because. It's a difficult balance because certainly there are privacy rights to people. When somebody is fired, the level of due process is extraordinarily minimal. I've represented several ship COs that have been fired that I totally disagreed with the reason they were fired, and I fought it. But ultimately, what comes out publicly is that they were fired for a loss of trust and confidence in their ability to lead. And even if I can go through and I can show why factually, the basis was wrong, ultimately, there's not really the due process, with that, with those firings. And one of the things that always bothered me, and I've advocated for this at times, to not put out a press release like that, because ultimately, these captains are then and commanders, they're going to then retire. They're going to go then and apply for a job on the outside.
Yep.
And if they really didn't do anything wrong and they don't have due process rights in the termination, then when they go fill out that job application, the job, they're going to Google them and they're going to say, oh, you were the captain of some warship and you got relieved for some, weird unspecified reason. And so to me, I would rather, for a lot of those clients, for it not to have come out at all. I had one client where, the reasons for his relief were so ridiculous. And I told the SJ, I said, tell your PAO, no offense, Teresa, don't put out the press release, because if you do, the Navy Times is going to call me and I'm not going to no comment it. I'm going to tell them why the Admiral, screwed this thing up, because I need to focus on my client's future job prospects. Even if I can't win putting him back in command of this ship, I can win making sure he gets his next job.
But
and
Tim,
so it's a very difficult and nuanced situation. And I think back to when I was in, I joined during the Clinton administration, and a lot of the obviously we're in a very different era. There were no podcasts, there was no social media, and when things would happen back then, we didn't need to know. We didn't protest. We didn't go online to say how terrible this is. We carried on the mission, whether you like the commander in chief or not, whether you like the secretary or not. And so we're kind of in a very different world now than when I joined, or I got out in 2013. And so it's a very different world than when I was coming up, where people feel like they're entitled to a lot more information. But before we switch back, I just want to disagree with Don on one point. I met General Plummer. I had a very nice conversation. He made a very good impression on me. I kind of liked him. I had a very limited interaction with him, but I liked him.
And I make it clear, we have a personality conflict. I don't think I'm sure he's doing a fabulous job as Judge Advocate General, much better than I could have ever done. But because of my advocacy to reform military justice, I'm kind of a pariah in the Jag Corps, so I don't get invited to Christmas parties, let's put it that way, or get Christmas cards. So my defending this, so my defending this tells me, this isn't because these are people that necessarily I agree with. I'm just very concerned about where we ended up in this, all three being fired. And, on a lot of this, I think I'm concerned about Secretary Hegseth's understanding of the JAG Corps. What does he know about this? It seems like his interaction with JAGs occurred in Iraq and Afghanistan many years ago, in which he wasn't happy with rules of engagement. And look, a lot of people aren't happy with rules of engagement. I briefed rules of engagement when I was deployed in Kuwait to air crews. I understand, they can be difficult. I understand there's a lot of nuances to them. But this is where I'm not sure Secretary Hegseth really gets it, is that JAG who was briefing him did not write that rule of engagement. They are not the ones who wrote the LOAC. The rules of engagement are written by commanders at a very high level. They're written by often the civilian leadership, and the JAG's role is to explain to people like then Lieutenant or Captain Hegseth, this is where you can get in trouble and this is what you shouldn't be doing. It's up to him to say, okay, I'm going to follow that, not follow that. And maybe there are certain JAGs who don't understand what their role is. Yeah. There's in the Air Force, we have 1,300 JAGs. I can't guarantee you every one of them gets what their mission is, but that is there. I believe it was during his testimony, he said that the rules of engagement were burdensome and they make it impossible to win the war. Okay. Very well could be true, but you raise that up through the chain of command. That's not an issue with the JAG Corps. That is an issue with civilian leadership and very senior leadership deciding what the rules of engagement will be. He also said that JAGs are very insular. It's a small insulated officers who perpetuate the status quo and goes well beyond what the status quo that hasn't worked very well. Okay. Yes, it's insular, as water's wet. That you can say that about every career field in the military that's very insular. But JAG Corps is kind of unique in the sense that line officers make up the majority of the promotion board, and they're the ones that ultimately select the Judge Advocate General. They're the ones that ultimately select any JAG general. They often disagree with what the current Judge Advocate General would want. I only became a colonel because my wing commander liked me. The JAG Corps probably wouldn't have made me a colonel, but my wing commander got me there. Almost every JAG is a large percentage of their OPRs or OERs, depending on your service, are written by a commander. And so I don't know if National Guard Major Pete Hegseth, now Secretary of Defense, understands the nuances there. And so it's not just a simple Chuck Plummer was anointed and he became the Judge Advocate General. Commanders had to agree with that, and commanders often override what other JAGs say. So, and that's my concern.
Yep.
Firing these people, not really understanding what the JAGs do, which goes way beyond what a lot of people like Secretary Kendall was talking about on CNN last night. It goes way beyond that. It's not just telling people what LOAC is, it's contracts. There's so many things we do.
Right.
Well, and to some of those points, I think that Secretary Hegseth understands the JAG Corps quite well. And I agree with a lot of the things that you just pointed out that he said. There is a difference, a distinction between, who writes the rules of engagement. You're absolutely right. There's a distinction between who writes the rules of engagement, who's presenting the training. But far too often, and what happened in his case is you have this young, captain who comes in, to try and interpret the rules of engagement for these troops, not having themselves necessarily the full understanding of it. And they're trying to give out, okay, here are some examples. And here's things that, if you're in this situation, do this. And oftentimes those interpretations offered by this, JAG officer are far more restrictive than what the rules actually are. And so where they have that ROE card, when he was there, he got an ROE card. In fact, I went and found a copy of the ROE card that he had at the time. And reading that versus what the JAGs were telling him you can and can't do, those were two different sets of rules. There's the written set, and then there's what these guys were being briefed. And so that's a problem. You know, if they're properly briefing and if they're properly trained to brief it, then you're absolutely right. There's no problem there. It's not the JAG's fault. But if the JAG is kind of imposing additional restrictions beyond that which the written rules are, that's a problem. Does he understand the JAG community? He called them an insular community. I say that is actually, you know, when you talk about insular from the line officer community, I say it's insular from the rest of the legal community, because the Jag Corps is very unique. Unlike every other legal organization in the entire government, it is one of those organizations where you come in as a lieutenant and you move up the ladder and you stay in this tiny little pyramid. And, you know, people don't come in midway through the pyramid. People don't leave and then come back, very rarely. And they train themselves. And a lot of the most talented people, they leave after their after their initial commitment, because they can make more money on the outside. And so you end up where the people that are at justice school, and look, there's a lot of good ones, and I've worked with a lot of good ones, but the people that are at justice school that are training these young kids are not necessarily the best, you know, trained themselves. And so this insular community keeps, you know, perpetuating this, and they keep telling themselves, oh, we're the best, you know, legal professionals out there, and they're not. Okay. I was never a JAG. I was a Navy surface warfare officer. When I got off active duty, I went to New York City. I went to law school. I learned how to try cases in New York City doing organized crime work. My mentors were all the guys who tried the old John Gotti trials. I learned how to try cases at the highest level. And when I go into a military courtroom, it's obvious to me the level of training and the level of expertise that's in there. It's not due to a lack of talent. It's due to a lack of training. And so that inability to train those people then perpetuates itself over those generations. And so that's what he's talking about when it's insular. DOJ, on the other hand, obviously it's a much larger organization, but at the same time, you never have had an attorney general that graduates law school, joins DOJ, climbs up the ladder, and has stayed within this pyramid the whole time. Every single one of them go work somewhere else, get some perspective on the outside, and then come back in. And so one of the things he talked about on that Sunday talk show was opening the aperture as to who they're going to consider for these next TJAGs. And quite frankly, I think, you know, to my personal opinion, a National Guard, an Air National Guard or a reservist may be a better choice to be the next TJAG, because they will have a lot more experience on the outside. You've never had a TJAG that has ever tried a case in the U.S. District Court. And now maybe you can. Maybe you can have a TJAG that was an actual U.S. attorney for a district out there. And so that's really what we're talking about here, is that you have these small insular communities that they don't even know. You know, there's so many aspects to when I go into these courtrooms and I see things that I say, this can be improved upon, this can be made better. And if we leave it to the JAG Corps to figure that out for themselves, they won't even think of those things, because they've never been outside of the system to know that there's another way to do it. And that's why we need to open the aperture more.
Well, what I would say to that, there's some things I agree with. Experience is a problem. So if you look at your service, the Navy, last year they did about 140 courts in the entire U.S. Navy. Air Force did about 250, 260. The entirety of the DOD did about 1,000 courts martial. When I came on active duty, the DOD was doing 10, 11, 12,000 courts martial. So there is a problem there. And there are obstruction among JAG Corps leadership of fixing those problems. And
you're saying that, hold on, let me just make sure I got this as the public, John, non-lawyer public. So you're saying we went from having like this many, like lots of court martials, to now. So what we're saying is that people that try cases obviously get way more experience, because they have to do rules of evidence. They have to do all these different procedures. So you're saying that over the course of several years in the military, we no longer have court cases.
We don't have an experienced base. And
we don't have an experienced base that has actually
right.
been in a
so
court.
If you look at if you look at sexual assault, the Air Force probably last year maybe did 50 sexual assault cases, and they had 25 designated attorneys to do those. And so it works out to be about 2 per attorney per year, assuming they weren't guilty pleas or anything else. And so the ability to get that is the experience you need to be really good. I don't necessarily agree that you need to be a district attorney or DOJ attorney to be good at this. I like to think I was really good at prosecuting and defending cases. I've never prosecuted in the civilian court either. But you need experience. You need ability to stand up in court and be comfortable. You need to know what the rules of evidence are like that. That comes from routine and over and over and over and being in the courtroom. And the Jag Corps leadership has been stuck in the 1950s on how they do leadership. And so if Secretary Hexeth had brought these 3 individuals in and said, hey, look, these are the issues I'm concerned about. Let's get on it. All right. And they said, no way, go to hell, Hexeth, or words that effect. Fire their butt. Give them goals of what you want to change. Now, one of the problems is we shouldn't just be out prosecuting people who shouldn't be prosecuted so we get more experience. We need to, and I've been saying this forever, and one of the reasons Jag Corps leadership doesn't like me, we need to specialize in military justice. Military justice, we rotate in and out of positions. The average judge advocate general hasn't done a trial since right now, if you look at them, it was probably, Bill Clinton was president or it's been a long time. I like a Chuck Plummer probably hasn't done a court martial this century. So that is a problem. But you don't just fire people because you disagree with that problem. And then if I can piggyback onto the rules of engagement, is saying if your entire view of the Jag Corps is based upon interaction with probably an inexperienced Army JAG or 1 or 2 of them in Iraq or Afghanistan, I don't think that's fair, because there are a lot of other JAGs, whether you're Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, or I guess Guardians now, who are really good and take care of and they understand where their limitations are. In that, there was a lot of surge in Afghanistan and Iraq. There was a lot of inexperienced people going over there. And if what the answer to that should have been is to raise that up, say, hey, we think this JAG is being too restrictive with the rules of engagement. That's on Pete Hexeth and the other infantry soldiers. And I will just say, I know I'm not Army infantry, but I have infantry men and women who like me. So I disagree that all infantry hate JAGs. I don't think that's true at all. I'm sure they're frustrated. I'm sure pilots get frustrated too when JAGs are reading 2 of them. The ceiling's 30,000 feet. You can't go below this 30,000 feet in this. And I had to brief that to helicopter pilots, and I said, look, I know this is stupid because you guys can't fly 30,000 feet. So there are rules out there that don't make sense. But it's not that individual JAG's problem or fault. And there is a responsibility to raise issues if the rules of engagement are too restrictive, raise those up. Or if you think the JAG is wrong, raise those up.
Yeah.
At the same time, the people that wrote those rules of engagement, while they may not be that young JAG standing in front of the platoon, it is a more senior JAG. We're not letting commanders write these rules of engagement without JAG input. And so
JAG input, yes, I agree.
So whether it's at the training level, whether it's at the lowest training level, or whether it's at the highest, writing level, to simply, try and push all blame off of the Jag Corps and say, oh, that's not our fault. I think they're involved at every level of this.
Yeah. And I think this is, I was just going to say, I can kind of summarize the 2 perspectives. If I can, one perspective is it was kind of on the commanders to hold them accountable or tell them where they're messing up and try to fix it, or give the ones that were let go an opportunity to fix. Whereas the other side of the coin is, well, they've had that opportunity to try to fix themselves and they didn't do it. This is kind of the two diverging views.
That's exactly it. Is that you don't need a single incident of misconduct to relieve somebody. If you don't like the culture of a community, then if you fire the leaders of those communities and say, we need somebody to come in, a new person to take it in a different direction, that is how you do it. And all these guys, they're not being like kicked out. Okay. They're being honorably retired. Okay. So it's not like they're,
and I think that's been really mischaracterized in the media, by the way,
Right.
that it's not, I mean, every single time I've seen it in the press, it's been, we wish these people well, they've served honorably.
Their pension is not being affected whatsoever, but ultimately, can you bring all the leaders in and say, hey, you have led this organization, for the past several years. I would like you to totally change the culture of the organization that you've led, totally change the culture of an organization that, that you implemented that culture. That is difficult. And I think that it is, to me, it's a strong message. And look, I've gotten, I know Don's gotten a lot of messages. I've also gotten a lot of messages from JAGs across the services who are excited about this. They're very happy about this because they do see that this is an opportunity for change. They see that this is an opportunity to where they can have somebody come in and make it better. One of the things that I constantly am banging my head against the wall on is the issue of training. Yes, we don't have enough contested court martials for people to get experience. And yet, and again, I'm going to pick on the Navy. The Navy and the Air Force is going to get mad at me for this, but the Navy we train the greatest fighter pilots in the world, the greatest ship drivers, the greatest submarines, the greatest maritime commandos in the world. And yet we fail to train people how to conduct basic investigations, prosecutions, and defense. Why is that? We have a system in place. And whether it's training, whether it's practice, mock trials or something like that, there's no reason why we have, all these highly trained, very effective people in every other community. And so why is it, and I'm not going to restrict myself to just the JAG Corps, NCIS, OSI, they are the Keystone Cops. Okay. Having, we don't do investigations correctly in DOD. We don't do any of that stuff at a professional level. And, whenever I get an NCIS or an OSI investigation, and I'm used to the FBI and DEA and HSI and all these other agencies, and it is like kindergarten work, what these investigators do. And then you hand it to an untrained, inexperienced JAG to say, okay, now make a case out of this, out of this investigative file. But it can be made better. I mean, they can do it. All we need to do is to have new leadership come in and kind of refocus, revamp training, bring ethics back in, and bring them up to that level. And not only is that going to improve, recruiting, retention, it's going to provide better opportunities for people when they get out. It's going to make them more marketable on the outside. It's going to improve every aspect of, both the JAG Corps and every aspect of the operating forces because they'll be better supported.
Well, I do want to turn this. Don, do you want to respond before I go to the next subject? Okay.
I would say, Tim, that if Secretary Hegseth had said things like this, that would be helpful. He hasn't. He has said
that's a good point.
That are dismissive of the JAG Corps. He hasn't said, this is why I'm doing this, is and I will say, I'm not a Trump fan. I didn't vote for Trump. I know you're aligned with Trump in a way, not completely. And that you represent, Secretary Hegseth, and I know you're talking in your personal capacity. But there is a fear of many people that this is a step towards authoritarianism. And if that's not what Secretary Hegseth wants, he should be cognizant of that. He represents the entire DOD. President Trump is the president for all of us. They should be cognizant of the fact that there are many people who fear this.
They do. They do.
And if this is about saying, hey, we need to revamp how the JAG Corps operates, I'm there. I've been fighting that fight for 20 some years. When we talk about the court-martial numbers, the United States Air Force had 1,380 JAGs when I came on an active duty in 1991. And they did about 1,400 courts-martial. Last year, they had 1,340 or 50 JAGs, and they did 250 courts. We have too many JAGs. When you talk about experience, okay, how are you going to get that experience when you bring in 400, 500 captains? When I bring in, but we have 400 or 500 captains at the base level offices in the Air Force, and they're doing a couple hundred courts, and of those, maybe 40 or 50 are contested. You look at it, we have almost 100 defense counsel in the Air Force. Judge alone trials members' trials are almost non-existent. The entirety of the DOD did 240 or 50 members' trials last year.
Yeah.
And you have thousands and thousands of JAGs. So there's, so Secretary Hicks wants to say, we need to downsize the JAG Corps. We need to right size them. I'm there with him. If he says we need to improve the litigation, we need to have real litigation tracks, I'm there with him. But right now, his message is, I don't want these people being in the way. And whether that's what he intends or not, that's a message that a lot of people are taking away. And that scares people.
Well, Don, I think this goes back to the messaging side to this, and I'll just say this in my personal off-duty capacity, is that I have seen the DoD Rapid Response 47 on X, and I have seen Hegseth's personal X. I've seen the DoD X, and that needs to be replicated across some of these other social media platforms, because I do think that right now the communications hasn't kept up with all the executive orders and all the policies, because there's a mismatch, as Don is saying, between all this, what I do feel, and I know, Don, you and I probably disagree, but what I do feel is good reform and things that we should be doing, and then how we're communicating some of these reforms and how what we're doing, because not everybody goes on X. In fact, I would say the majority of people who lean more left to center stay away from some of these channels that DoD's using as much as possible. So maybe that's true, Don, is that some of this is a messaging issue as well. What would you say, Tim?
And part of that is, this is a transition period. Sean Parnell, who's the head, I forget what his exact title is, but
right, but he's the spokesperson, DoD.
The new John Kirby.
Right.
He just started this week.
Yep.
Sean is a friend, also former client, and he's a very smart guy, and he just started this week. And so I think that, there is an element of that, where there is so much stuff going on right now. And
yes,
and you had, obviously you had the chairman, you had the CNO, you had the JAGs all in one shot on a Friday night
at 8:30.
And
yes.
And so that is something to consider. But part of the problem also is, yes, I think that some of these things, and I think you're going to see more amplification. I think you're going to see more explanations of some of these things going forward. But and so I don't want to criticize any of the communication that they've done so far, but honestly, if you look at just the environment that they're in, where they're getting bombarded with tell me 5 things you did last week, and all these other things, there's only so much bandwidth that they have to put out at a time when they're in transition, where they don't even have their whole team on board yet.
Right.
Half the team is not even there, and they're trying to get people confirmed. They're trying to get people on board,
and they're traveling. They're going all over the place.
And they're traveling, and they're doing all this stuff. And there are certain people on the team that are holdovers from before. And the reality is, when Austin left, he left people in OSD that do not believe in what Secretary Hegseth is trying to do. So you have certain people inside the tent that are fighting against it too. And so it's a very difficult transition period, but knowing the secretary as I do, I trust him. I believe that he is there to do the right thing. Yeah, I understand people are saying, oh, this is a step towards authoritarianism, and I say absolutely not. To my mind, knowing him, knowing the president, absolutely not. It would be the first authoritarian regime in history that starts by slashing the size of the government, with Doge and all that stuff. But I think that some of this, just sit back. I think you're going to see some more changes coming forward. I think that once you see who the new TJAGs that are selected, I know that they're started the process already on that, and I think that once you see who they select there, a lot of these fears are probably going to disappear.
I do want to get in one more question that just transition point before the call ends. And as you guys both know, I'm very passionate. I've been a very big advocate with working with Walk the Talk Foundation. I don't know if you're both familiar with Walk the Talk Foundation. It's a advocacy group that is working to clean up the administration investigation system. So they feel, Francesca Graham, Ryan Sweezy, that there is not due process within administrative investigations. And I want to turn it over. I guess I'll go over to you, Don, first, and then back to you, Tim. Do you think that, Don first, do you think that do you agree that that's definitely a system that is due for a overhaul? And if so, is that something you'd want to see these new JAGs taking a look at?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the administrative investigative process, whether it's IG, command directed investigations, 15-6 investigations is broken. We're asking people to do complex investigations that have no training in it, don't want to be doing it. It's an extra duty for them. We ask people who have never had to make a credibility determination on witnesses to suddenly be making credibility determinations. And we're, as a result of it, we have people who may escape misconduct, or we have people, I think, way too often that have 15-6s or command direct investigations result in adverse actions being taken against them that shouldn't have been. And the reality is, like, command direct investigations and IG are not supposed to be investigating criminal misconduct, but they often do, particularly when it comes to senior officers. And so, investigations, I will kind of piggyback on what Tim was saying about OSI and CID and NCIS. I think there are a lot of great investigators, but experience is a problem with them, and also being able to stay in their positions. And to do a good investigation takes a long time. It's just like being a good litigator. You just don't pick somebody off the street and say, go try a case. You need the experience to do it. So I 100% think it's an area ripe for reform.
Over to you, Tim.
I can't disagree with anything that he said. Aside from I haven't met the competent NCIS investigator yet. But I mean, it's true. The military does a lot of things really, really well. Investigations is not one of them. And they can't recruit, they can't train, they can't get good investigators. And so it is major problem. And then, but even, so you first start with training of, set command investigators aside, because they have zero training. The IGs are great if you're doing an audit and you're trying to find, waste. But then when it get, the whole waste, fraud, and abuse, then you start getting them doing essentially, these conduct investigations. They're not trained for that. Not only are they not trained for that, but then there's no accountability, because when the IG comes out with their finding, that's binding. They come out with their, they substantiated an allegation, and the commander has to take action based on a substantiated allegation. There is no accountability for that whatsoever. How different would IGs have to operate if they knew at the end of their investigation, they're not just going to turn in a report that gets acted upon as if it's gospel. They're going to return in a report, and then they're going to have to go into a courtroom where they have to face somebody like me to point out everything that they did wrong. They don't have to worry about that. They don't have to ever worry about ever facing any cross-examination questions or any due process at all, which is fine. if they're doing audits. But if they're doing misconduct investigations, then people's careers are going to be destroyed because of it. That's a structural problem. And when you take that structural problem on top of the lack of training of these people, that's a recipe for disaster.
How would you fix it?
I would change the IG system to kind of take a lot of these misconduct investigations out of there, or subject it to some due process after their findings comes through. So as opposed to forcing commanders to just accept whatever the untrained IG investigator says is gospel, actually then put it through a due process. We have plenty of JAGs that are looking for a trial experience, so do those. Have little trials on those if you want to. Add due process and then increase training. Those two things can help fix the IG system.
So saying add a due process system within the administrative investigation system. So giving the person who is accused or the person who is accusing an opportunity to bring forth their own witnesses, to bring forth their own evidence.
Yeah. In the NYPD, when somebody is accused of any type of misconduct, if it's criminal, it gets sent over to the district attorney's office, and they have all the due process rights that they have in a criminal case. If it's not, if it's administrative, then they go to the trial room in One Police Plaza, where they have, it's relaxed rules of evidence, but it is still
a rule of evidence process.
It is still a trial. You still have the right to cross-examination, the right to confront the witness against you, the right to have that internal affairs investigator get up on the stand, talk about what they did in their administrative investigation, where they found that you used the car for your personal purposes, or whatever it is, or you use your parking placard improperly. And you can cross-examine them. You have that due process. So why not take that system here? Have administrative trials.
Yeah, I've never thought about that. Over to you, Don.
And I would say that this might be one of those, Navy does things one way, Air Force does it another. We're not bound.
Air Force probably already does it right.
Yeah. Not bound by the IG results, but to me, it's just like with the military justice and the investigators. It's making this a career position, independent, professionalized. They're doing this supposedly sexual harassment. If it's a sexual harassment allegation, they have to be a trained investigator, and then that's something you do. I don't know if they're getting fired by Doge or not, but yeah, that's what we need, is to have experience. Experience really matters, and that's just something that across the board in the military, when it comes to the world of accountability and justice, experience and its value is not understood. I put it that way.
Absolutely. Well, we are at the end of the hour, so we're going to wrap it up, and I'm going to turn it over to Tim for some last words, and then Dawn, you're going to get the final word, since you were the one who originally reached out to me to do this conversation and graciously agreed to share the screen with Tim here. I think this went amazingly well, and I'm so honored that I got the chance to do it. But over to you, Tim, for your final words.
Yeah, I just want to say that we are certainly at a transition point, and as much as people want to, based on their personal politics, try to read certain, catastrophic, motives into these things, the reality is Secretary Hegseth is looking to do the right thing. He's looking to improve every aspect of the DoD, and the military justice system is one of those pieces that impacts everything else that they do. Every other aspect of the military is impacted by the military justice system. And if the justice system isn't being administered as well as it can be, then negatively impacts everything else. And so increasing that, which is what he wants to do, professionalizing it, making it more effective, making it more, making sure that everybody has their due process rights, that's going to improve everything. So I would ask that everybody just, instead of, trying to invent some way that this is a step towards authoritarianism, give the secretary a chance, because I think you're going to see some tremendous results here.
Over to you, Don.
Okay. first, again, I appreciate this, and I would hope that some of our media would look at this as a way you can have a discussion without people talking over each other and fighting. So I think this has been helpful. So thank you, Patrice and Tim, for doing this. I would say, look, I want success, and there's been nobody who has fought more to reform the military justice system than I have for the last 15 years or so. It needs reform. It has been reformed. More reform is necessary. If that's Secretary Hex's goal, yeah, good. I'm behind that. But I would say he had opportunities. He's had several opportunities. It's not, you talk about shifting the blame to commanders. This kind of shifting blame to PA to say he hasn't had opportunity. He went on Fox News Sunday. He answered questions yesterday. Those answers did not say what you said, Tim. And I think that's where it's failing and is failing and drives that fear that people have. I'm not here to say anything negative or positive about Secretary Hegseth as a person or President Trump as a person. I'm just saying as their message to a country that is deeply divided, and I don't think we can ignore that there is a deep division in our country, they sent the wrong message. Particularly, okay, I'll defer to you, Tim. Everything's screwed up in the Navy. I don't think it is in the Army and the Air Force. Again, I don't see why either one of those judge advocate generals were removed. They were. I can't imagine if that directive had come. I want this to get better. That they would have done anything other than salute and okay, we're going to do it. We're going to do it, boss. You're the man. We'll take care of it. So hopefully the fears are unfounded, but they are out there.
That's fair. Well, I definitely got a lot out of this, and thank you, Don, for the kind compliment. And my hope is that more podcasters will agree to do shows like this, or even our wonderful media will agree to do shows like this, because I think this is where we really learn and we really get perspectives from both sides. And I will side with you, Don, that I've told Tim this too about the media side and the communication side. So, but I'm also very, very impressed with what I am seeing them put out. I have never seen communications like I've seen on X. I mean, literally the day he's in Gitmo, there's videos in real time, professionally polished, good quality. We've never had that in my business like that, the way that I've seen it. So I am optimistic, and we'll just have to sit back and see what happens. But I'm going to go full screen, meet you guys backstage to just say goodbye very quickly and then do my closeout. But thank you to your both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining me tonight. I do know there was a ton of comments across LinkedIn, YouTube, and some other places. So I will get to those later. I saw that a lot of you were also going back and forth in the comments. So I think that's always good too, when I just didn't get a chance because I was so engrossed in the conversation. So we will wait and see what happens with this. Thank you all for joining me tonight. I will be back next week. I believe I have 3 shows next week. So a very busy podcast week, but can't wait to bring you those guests. And as I always close these calls, please take care of yourself, take care of each other, and have a